go ahead and get started with the Village of Lake Bluffs Finance Committee meeting on Monday, February 14th. May we have a roll call, please?
You may. Member Rappin.
Here.
Member Ryder.
Here.
And Chair Inkman.
And I am here as well.
Okay.
Due to the COVID emergency and in accordance with Section 7E of the Open Meetings Act, this meeting will be held primarily virtually. At least one representative from the village will be present at Village Hall. That's at 40 East Center Avenue in Lake Bluff. And the virtual meeting will be simulcast for members of the public who do not wish to view the virtual meeting from another location. Pursuant to the executive orders issued by the governor, the number of people who may gather at Village Hall for the meeting is limited due to the mandated social distancing guidelines and limitations on gatherings. And accordingly, the opportunity to view the virtual meeting at Village Hall will be available on a first-come, first-served basis. All right, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on January 24th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Are there any comments or updates or corrections from the Finance Committee minutes?
I have a comment.
Yes, Regis?
I was not in that meeting, Barb. I could not make that meeting.
I think you showed up at the end, and I noticed that, so I didn't know if it should more properly be noted, arrived at 6:30 or whatever the time was. So I just left it because of
I think I have a
You
note
sneak
about that. We can adjust that. Yep.
Fair,
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other comments?
I don't have any.
All right.
Don't either.
All right. Well, hearing none, I guess
Roll call vote.
a roll call vote.
Yep. Member Rappin.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
And Chair Inkman.
Aye. All right, at this time, the Finance Committee allocates 15 minutes for any members of the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. Are there any virtual attendees or attendees at the Village Hall who would like this opportunity to address the Finance Committee?
There is no one present besides Regis and I, and there's no one on the call virtually besides us.
Okay. Well, that means we can get down to our next item, the business discussion. So we're about to embark on a discussion with a review of the comprehensive fee schedule. And there have been some proposed revisions, and that was the subject of this memorandum, which addresses water use fees, zoning application fees, and then not at this time, but moving forward, some more detailed discussion about historic preservation. So Drew or Bettina, did you want to kind of tee us off?
I'll take it really quickly. So the water use fees, I mean, that you guys can talk about that probably more definitely in the next, but for the next fiscal year, staff is recommending flat and then an increase, a small increase in year two. As far as you noted, Chair Inkman, the Historic Preservation Commission is really nothing to talk about quite yet, just kind of a heads up that's coming. And then the zoning application fees, I mean, that's one where you guys, I think, could safely talk about having reduced fees or waivers and or just giving some time and let that see how much, you don't have to do anything, right? You can sit and wait too. So if there's any direction, we're certainly happy to produce some very specific examples, but I don't know that there's a lot of numbers to be, to manipulate necessarily, right? It's a small application fee, and how far do you want to go, if at all?
Right. So I guess we'll just start with the water use fees. Certainly there's a lot of background in terms of the water fund's budget and the analysis of, the rates that have been set historically. And, what's being proposed is to just kind of status quo, keep the rates where they are. And, in light of, nothing that merits changing the rates, I don't know if there's any input from either Steve or Susan or any other board members regarding keeping the rates at where it is.
I agree with the staff recommendation of keeping rates where they are. And further, I think there's another discussion, as Drew pointed out, to be had later on about increasing those at a later date.
I have a question, Barbara.
Sure.
So we will be faced with increased expenditures regarding water-related deliveries, such as lead pipes, changing mains, things that we probably haven't thought about yet, or we haven't really clearly accounted for. Have you had the chance to discuss this or to think about it?
Well, when we had the opportunity to look at the capital schedule during the last meeting, I think that some of the work for those lead pipes was kind of penciled in for some of those out years. But in terms of what we're required to do, maybe Bettina, you could help us kind of fill in some of what we're being asked to do and when, what are our deadlines?
And before she does, is it all right, Sherrick, if I just talk really briefly on that? So
I'm very happy. Mhm.
So we started to have a conversation from staff presenting potential impacts of the Lead Service Act, the Notification and Replacement Act. And this group did not have a chance to have a conversation, ran out of time, and which was okay because this is something it's a new act, it's in place effective this year. And there is a great amount of conversations that are just beginning to start because of the requirements of this act. There's a specific timeline that the village needs to follow and have certain submittal requirements to the state. And but there is, as suspected, Jeff, you're on the call. Yes, there you are. There's been a meeting that's Highland Park is organizing so that all the communities can get together and have a conversation about how, there's going to be approach to this and see if there's any opportunities for economies of scale to be had by working together. So I think the village is going to have to do a handful of lead service replacements in the near term before the village actually has a comprehensive policy to address this act. But in that the near term plan was to take these as the village would commit to replacing the lead line if it runs across any, and we think there's maybe, Jeff, how many on this current, most recently, 4? 3, thank you. So I think we're looking at 3 on the work that we've just started, and that what the village's approach was going to be what our past practice was, that we're going to replace it from the tap on the main to essentially the property line where the B box is, and then we're going to have a conversation with the owner. I think Jeff started having those conversations, and that we're going to try to work with them. And I think the first conversation that started last week with one of the residents was, let me understand what that cost me, and we asked our contractor to give them a quote. And I don't know where that's at, Jeff, from that most recent update.
That's still in progress, trying to get the quote.
Okay, so, but that's what was talked about, is how we were going to approach it for the near term. But,
So again, the initiation or the thing that began those 3 hitting the list of we're going to take a look at those now was that the resident was doing some work, and so all of that pipe was going to be touched, or the village is doing something, and because the village is touching something, at that point it makes sense. Things are already getting dug up and changed. Let's address anything that feeds into that.
yeah, it's that situation. We are replacing water mains, and as part of this work, we think we're going to encounter 3 lead service lines. And so we're trying to be in compliance with the act and following the act, and that's what we're doing for the near term. But this is, I guess, it's a little bit, it's not perfect in that we would love to have a policy in hand to say this is how we're going to handle this and address each one.
Right.
Right now, given the timing of everything, this is where we're at. And that's, I guess, this all gets back to when this act was approved and the timing of it. I think there was a lot of hand-wringing by municipalities and other utility providers that the state has made this requirement upon all of us, yet there's no clear express language in the act as to who's responsible for it, but it seems the buck seems to stop with municipalities or utilities. So I think President Charlot's point is that does our infrastructure analysis and our rate analysis account for all these things and to include potentially water main replacement, water lead service replacements? The answer is no, that's not included in this rate analysis.
So my point was, we do not have a policy today. We probably will have a policy today that might be full, half, or nothing, but somewhere in the middle of all that. And we might want to think today that in prevision to, forecasting that probably there will be a cost to the community, we might want to put a rate hike today, maybe minimum, to basically account for what will happen tomorrow. And maybe it's premature, but I think that might be wise.
I have a small comment as far as the budget is concerned. The capital summary that we looked at last meeting did include $400,000 for total water infrastructure improvements on an annual basis. And that number included the lead service line replacement for the out years of 27 through 31. And that 400,000 is on the rate analysis sheet in all three of those scenarios. So we could spend more money than the 400,000, but for right now it was bundled into that number.
And the total number of potential lead service lines, I seem to remember it was something in the 100 to.
Right. So Jeff had given us a rough estimate of about $200,000 a year for a 5-year term. And that was really a rough estimate, just to at least place mark the cost.
Right. So the question is, do we feel like we still need to nudge it up today, to kind of anticipate, or do we want to hold steady and wait till we see the window in which we're being mandated to make the changes, and then also set the policy as far as how that cost is split? It's an issue of how much, and it's an issue of when.
So if I might, Trustee Ryder, so I'm looking at the projections, the 3 projection sheets. The first one of the scenarios hold steady at 7.61 rate, correct? And then we've modeled it as a steady state thereafter, 7.61, as if we were not going to increase in the out years. But as I understand the recommendation, what we're proposing to do is hold steady at 7.61 this year, and then likely go up thereafter. Am I understanding the proposal such that the first one, that shows 7.61 across the board, is not one we think we're actually going to do?
No, historically, it's just been the request from the Finance Committee that I outlay one at no rate increase, one at 2%, and then one at a 3% for a portion of the period, and in the out years not. And typically, the percentage of increase has fallen between 2 and 3%.
So that's what I wanted to just raise. The one that makes, given what we think we know about the lead mitigation, the one that makes more sense to me is the third one with a modest increase now. Let's see, or maybe it's the second one. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out. Oh yeah, it looks like the second one. It's a gradual increase over the years, maybe not needing to go to 8.92 in the 29-30, but instead a gradual increase this coming year. I guess I go back to it's not as if we don't think there's going to be increased expenses. We're certain of it. And so isn't it better to do a gradual increase over time? I'm just asking whether or not it might be more appropriate to go up by 2% this next year, I guess. That's my push, I guess, given what we know is in the offing.
Barbara, could I ask a question?
Sure.
And maybe Bettina, this would be for you too. You know the CARES Act money that we have that's like, what is it, 700 and some thousand? And that's for infrastructure. Could any of that money be used for the lead pipe replacement?
So the ARPA money that we have can be, right, CARES Act was the one before, but.
Sorry,
ARPA,
yeah.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure that's not the one.
Right. I think, how much was it?
So it's like $780,000.
Could we use that
You can.
to offset some
There
of
is
the?
no restriction. It can be used for, actually states that it can be used for lead line mitigation.
Okay,
Does it
so
have to be done by a certain time?
That's part of the problem. We have to have the monies planned to be spent by FY25 and through FY26. And some of this lead line replacement, some of the laws that are behind it are, it's out further. And we talked about internally, staff-wise, how we could maybe approach it similar to the meter change-out program, where someone's doing more than, is suggested in the current capital summary plan. But we decided internally with Jeff that really wouldn't work very well. They're going to take up much more time than just a meter replacement.
Right.
Because there's a lot more interaction with the resident and, with their property and so on. So it's not as quick. So to spread it out over that period of time would be much more feasible.
So what you're saying is it's not like we can say there are 125, let's do 50 in this year and 50 in the next year.
Right. No, that wouldn't
not.
work. It's just too many.
Right. And so
Too much work.
it's being, in the projections, it's being phased out over perhaps 5 years.
Right. Just to meet the state mandate
Right.
here.
Right. And so the dollars have to be, because those ARPA dollars are tied to certain time periods, it wouldn't be a good fit.
But could we use some of it? Or is it an all or nothing proposition, Bettina?
So, the last Treasury, the final Treasury notification actually says that if you qualify for the revenue replacement, you have up to a $10 million stipend that you can qualify under, which we definitely would because we're not getting $10 million. And then that money can actually just be put back into operating. So technically, if it's in operating and you're spending it on one thing, can something else, can you shuffle it around? My answer is going to be, yes, you could. If you're spending less on operating due to this influx of money on one thing, could those funds that were earmarked be pushed somewhere else? Sure. It's just how you spend it.
Right. But you're saying we just have a time limit, and as Barbara just pointed out, the time it's going to take for the lead line replacement is much, much longer than the limitations on this ARPA money.
Yes.
Okay. So we have to find a way maybe to use some of it. I don't know. I was just trying to offset. I agree with Susan's point about incremental increase. I was just thinking of that money because it's still sitting there, and we haven't really talked about what we're going to do with it.
So it's not to say from a historical standpoint, and I'm not suggesting this either way, but just to give you information, that the general fund has in the past provided an infusion of cash into the water fund as a bookmark for a project, i.e. the water meter project. Initially, we were going to fund that in increments, and then we decided, the Finance Committee and the board decided to take out bond debt. So that initial infusion of cash still remained in the water fund, but could that continue? Could you do it again? Sure, it's always an option.
Thank you.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts, Steve, now that you've heard about Susan's thoughts? And
Well, I thought I would ask Drew why the staff recommended no increase, given the knowing that we're going to have expenditures down the line. I'm sure it has to do. Well, Drew, why don't you explain?
Yeah, so part of it has been a village practice of keeping it flat for a year, then making it increase, keeping it flat, and it's kind of been the practice that the village has followed. So that's one part of it. The other part is, I think I'm optimistic that the next 12 months that collectively we're going to come up with a policy that can address the lead service, and we'll have greater clarity about that moving forward. And that would be, I think, to tie it to a specific plan. I mean, we have it in the out years. Yes, there is $400,000 in the water service model, but we also show in the capital plan an additional $200,000. So it's not the full increment of the improvement, right? So there's money, there's investment in infrastructure. It can go towards water mains, which is what I think when we put this together, that was what we were talking about, water mains and valves and other appurtenances related to our system. But there is an additional $200,000 a year that we show in the capital plan that would be dedicated, and we talk about starting that in the out years beginning, FY '27. That's what we tentatively put in there. But again, I think it's just the idea, yes, of course, you can increase now and you can justify it because there's always more water mains to replace. There's always plenty of infrastructure to invest in. And, but I think it was just more of, hopefully to have more information and better planning moving forward with how to address the specific additional lead service. Again, maybe there's some miracle and the state says, or the feds say, here's some dollars for that. But it's hard to know now, and was hoping for better information within the next 12 months.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I mean, I don't feel real passionate whether it's, you know, a 0% increase for this year, we learn more, and then next year, if it needs to be 2 or maybe it needs to be 4, we're not talking about a huge percentage increase. If we can buy clarity over the next year and we can tell our residents that we're not going to take an increase this year, then I'm fine with that strategy. So I really am fine to go either way here. So I don't have a strong opinion, Barbara.
Okay. Well, I from what I'm hearing from Susan and Steve, unless you have more to add, Susan?
I was just going to say, now that I've noticed the pattern that Drew has identified at 7.31 for 2 years and then 7.42 for 2 years, the holding steady this coming year makes a little more sense to me. I guess what doesn't make sense is, and I understand now from Bettina why we do it that way, but is to hold steady thereafter. So I'd be comfortable holding steady this year based on the staff recommendation. I have no problem with that. It looks like it does follow a pattern that we've had in the past.
And Bettina's sharing something here on the screen.
All right, so this is just the history or the data behind the chart that was in the memo that showed the water rate increase in the CLC jar, but you can see the rate increases historically over the years. And the last few we've held in that pattern that Drew mentioned.
And Jeff Hansen, if you would please, maybe there's some more intelligence you can share regarding CLC Jawa's future plans for rate hikes. And I know there's lots of question marks about potential new customers and other infrastructure needs, but the idea that they were going to hold their rates, that reduced rate that we recently experienced from them, how long is it going to stay that low? I don't know if you have the latest intel on that front.
It's going to creep back up over the next 10 years. There's a large discussion about whether or not we add more members or more customers to Jawa to help keep the rate down. It doesn't have a huge impact, but the reason why Jawa's rate fell a couple of years ago is because they retired a lot of their debt from the initial construction of the plant, which is great, but now that means everything in that plant is 30 years old. So their maintenance is going up. There's questions about their pipelines. And so I would expect that to creep up over time, maybe a little faster than they project, just based on things coming up that need repair. There's nothing cheap over in that building. So, but it should stay less than it was for the foreseeable future. I think it dropped about 50 cents a thousand. I think it's going to add, 2-3 cents, maybe a nickel every couple of years as we go on.
Yeah, an alternative approach they could have had is they said, hey, we're going to proudly hold our rates flat for the next 6 years and enjoy that additional margin to invest in their own capital, but they chose not to. But then they're also, they're led by local elected officials, so there we are.
So from the rates that were in the water analysis projection sheets that were in that pink column that referenced the Jawa rates, those came from their budget.
Right.
So it's what they predicted.
Right. Well, it sounds like what I'm hearing from the finance committee members is that they're comfortable with keeping the historical pattern of keeping it flat, gathering more data, seeing what information or what kind of policy we can set regarding, lead line replacement once more information is available. And I think we're just going to go with staff recommendation at this point.
And if
I'm comfortable.
Do we need a motion for this?
Ideally, yes. Just one more note, not to drag this out, but there was conversations years ago, and Chair Inkham, you may recall this, that the idea of the village changing the structure of its water billing rates to encourage conservation. And so that they would kind of turn the rate upside down and say, bigger users, you pay a larger volume, if you're pushing a large volume through your meter, we're going to try to discourage that and charge you a higher rate, and those that were use less would be paid a lesser rate. And so I think at the time, and this goes back years, maybe before you were on the committee, Chair Inkerman, now that I think about it. But the idea was that's not something we're interested in, so there's different ways to approach it. I even think, and I don't want to guesstimate, but I believe the sustainability plan even had some comments about conservation rates being analyzed too. But so we can bring all that back to you as a bigger conversation once maybe there's more clarity around lead service lines and funding of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that is worth exploring. Not necessarily this year, but next. I'd be interested in knowing, a year from now, studying what other communities have done in that vein. I think it is consistent with our, ecological concerns that we have generally, that we incentivize a little bit more brown grass in the summertime, put a negative spin on it, or maybe more native plants that are able to withstand the drought that we get from time to time. Those kinds of things make sense to me to be explored. Perhaps more complex than we have time or interest in doing right now, but I would be interested in that next year.
Okey-doke.
So do we have a motion to have staff continue with the flat water rate moving forward for the next year?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Member Ryder?
Aye.
Member Rappin?
Aye.
And Chair Inkerman?
Aye. So we've gone through the water operating budget. Next is the vehicle equipment and replacement fund.
And just for clarity's sake, so there is no direction or no desire to visit the zoning, the ADU fee structure?
I apologize. We did not discuss that at all. That was an oversight. That wasn't my my decision. That was my oversight. So the idea being that because it's a special use permit, it would require this $3,000 escrow, which some may feel is a bit steep for such a project. And we may want to adjust that in some ways, adopt some kind of a policy that takes that special use permit escrow and uses, a percentage or, some type of a fee adjustment to encourage, or not even to encourage, but perhaps to not overly penalize residents who wish to pursue having an ADU on their property.
So that I understand the problem that we're attempting to solve here is that if someone were just doing an addition and the variation is less than 25% of the applicable standard, then the escrow is $1,500 and a $500 fee. And if you were instead with that in that same footprint, you weren't expanding the bulk, but instead you were building within that bulk an accessory dwelling unit, or perhaps expanding somewhat, but not over 25%. You would nonetheless, because it's a special use, have to pay the $3,750 fee. Am I understanding that? And the concern is the parity between those two?
Well, I think the issue is that the PCZBA wanted to try to eliminate as many hurdles or differences between somebody pursuing an ADU versus somebody doing a traditional addition, right? And so addition, you're paying you're going to pay just a building permit fee because it's presumably all as of right. Alternatively, you could have to get zoning relief, and there's that you're encountering a zoning process which you're going to incur escrow fees for that and an application fee. And there's, depending on the level of variation being sought, it could be, there's a difference in fee of $250. If it's greater than 25%, it's going to the board, there's a higher fee. And typically that means more legal, so that's why we charge the escrow. And the escrow is there to be a pass-through, right? The village is trying not to absorb fees for somebody's special request, right? We're trying to let that applicant carry that burden versus the entire community. And so that's a longstanding practice and policy. So I think what this really boils down to is if you would like to help support ADUs coming through the process, then you could say, we're going to waive or cut in half the application fee. And the village would subsidize the application fee in terms of covering any cost. They still would need to fill out an escrow, but the idea that that's the fee I think I would focus your energy on and saying is that $750 fee.
So you're saying that the $3,000 escrow as opposed to the $1,500 escrow, which is for variation?
Yeah,
That would still be there.
the idea that escrow, well, no matter how much money they post in the beginning, contractually, they're still obligated. If let's say for some reason there was some protracted zoning hearing that went out for weeks and there was extended legal fees, at the end of the day, that party is still responsible for whether it's $6,000 or $60. They're on the hook for that. So we typically try to do our best guess of what fees are. And so that's why we usually ask for that amount. So again, I think it's something that is very low intensity in terms of scrutiny at a public hearing. Then a smaller fee is fine. And frankly, they can give us $1, but at the end of the day, they're still responsible for it. We're just trying to manage expectations about people going through the process, and that's what it's really about. So again,
I see.
yeah.
So it's more the fee than the escrow amount. The escrow amount may be
What it is.
reasonable at a $3,000 number or a $1,500 number. That's sort of a best effort to estimate the various costs. But I guess a question is whether or not the application fee ought to be the full $750
Or
when it's an ADU.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to, incentivize this type of activity? Because that's in essence what we would be doing. And the difference is $250. It's not huge, but it's something that we can consider.
But I would like to advocate for the reduction of that fee, Barb, given that we are doing ADUs for people to have extended family that sometimes doesn't have a mean to live somewhere else, or that has less mean than in this community. And to that extent, I would think that we don't really want to charge a $750 fee because that just doesn't make sense,
Well, there would be some type of fee. The question is, does it remain at the $750 or do we have it be, equitable with the $500 fee for a variation?
And that's where I would go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask? Oh, go ahead.
But no, go ahead, Steve.
Drew, can I ask why did the PCZBA decide to make this a special use permit as opposed to a permitted use?
Well, maybe Chair Ryder's more.
I was hoping you wouldn't punt that to me.
Well, there was a lot. It was very, very close to being that. I think it came down to a handful of concerns: height of the structure relative to a principal structure, trying to distinguish, of somebody having an addition and drawing those distinctions, it was really close that it did not show up as a right use. It was very close.
Okay, so we wanted a little bit more control over the process. And if it had been a permitted use, sorry, I'm not great with zoning in Lake Bluff. What would the cost have been if it were a permitted use?
It would just be the cost of a building permit, presuming they fit all the specifications and standards laid out in the code.
And a building permit would depend on the cost of the project.
3% of X, whatever your project is.
And when it's a special use permit, we're talking about a fee plus that 3%?
Correct.
Yeah, so because the PCZBA decided that they wanted greater control, over this, I don't see why we would have any fee in addition to what would be a permitted use. So we in essence are trying to get a little more control over the process. I'm not sure why we need control plus extra fees when this was very nearly a permitted use and we want to have people do it. It doesn't make sense to me to have any fee in addition to the 3% permit fee.
Well, Drew, just compare the work involved, because it is going to be a special use. I mean, how do we quantify what that would cost in terms of additional staff time? Because it is going to still go through that extra process. I mean,
Okay, that's fair.
you know,
Yeah, there is, and honestly, I don't know that you're going to have people standing in line in front of Village Hall waiting to submit for ADU applications. I mean, that was the other reason why I suggested in the memo, you may just want to wait and see what the demand is, and when somebody submits, they can always come in as part of that application to seek waiver, right? You have some policies around that too. So you can consider it at that time and just kind of wait and see. I mean, that's a possibility as well.
well, seeking a waiver usually requires some type of demonstrated need or some type of, I'd hate for it to be just that, it's only the person who has the special knowledge that you can ask for it, or,
I think, Barbara, I would add that we may be going down a path we would regret if we are waiving ADU fees but not permitted use fees for additions.
yeah.
I understand the desire to encourage people to do it, but it's going to be few and far between people that can because of the limitations in the ordinance we just adopted.
Yeah, and the part about asking for waivers is I'd rather have it be a policy that's set, that is reasonable and represents the cost more closely, and I don't want to be punitive to any group, but it does seem to make sense to associate staff time and costs with the people who are doing the project. So perhaps a reduced fee.
We should remember these are just miniature houses, so it is substantially different than putting on an addition. I mean, an ADU can be, it's a lot. I think maybe understanding what the application fee covers and backing into it justifies the increase and the difference between 500 and 750. I don't know, Drew, could you explain that for those of us who are new to this? Why, what the genesis of that is, because maybe that justifies the difference.
The difference between a fee
Between the $500 and the $750, I mean, there's a difference in the fee,
yeah.
and maybe I see where Barbara's going. She's making a really good point. I mean, this isn't just an arbitrary number, right? There's something related to it, and I think it's important to understand what that is.
Well, I think the truth is, if the fees were established a very long time ago, they haven't been changed in a long period of time, and they're probably consistent across many communities, but most communities have tried to recapture any additional cost or services through the escrow process, right? So there's a baseline fee, you're having to pay for legal notices, there's the initial assumption that there is staff time and there is some minimal legal fees involved, but if you're going to create a new ordinance, if you're going to modify the zoning code and go through all that process, there's real cost, and that are above and beyond the actual application fee associated with covering those minimal expenses. I mean, as an example, Glenn, help me out here. The cost to do a legal notice in the paper for let's say the Stonebridge notice for this week's meeting, how much was that cost of that legal notice?
Yeah, and that's an escrow payable expense. Those typically run between $75 and $125, and that's really just based on the length of the legal description on your deed. They charge us by the word.
So correct me if I'm wrong, those reimbursable type expenses that funnel through escrow are on top of that 750, because the 750, it's a flat number that represents an increase on staff burden, and it's not it's not like staff puts it in a bucket that says I spent 1.2 hours on this activity, and so it's going to eat up part of that 750. It's kind of a generic bucket of
Flat fee.
staff time. Yeah, it's a flat fee. But why that flat fee would be more or less than the flat fee for a variation. I mean, maybe we want it to have it be just comparable with a variation, so it doesn't appear to be punitive. We are asking the homeowners to go through a few more hoops, but it's so that we can have control. And so, to me, that seems like a reasonable approach to put it at the same level as, if they need to ask for a variation. Just a thought.
Just a variation that the authority rests with the PCZBA, that less than 25%, right? That's what you're throwing in that category.
Yes.
So from a real dollar standpoint, what is the variation? I mean, what is it?
Well, I mean, the difference for the village would be we're collecting $250 less, because it's that flat fee plus whatever those reimbursable, lawyer fees, published in a paper fee.
Yeah, so it'd be $1,500 and $500, $1,500 deposit and $500 fee.
No, I still think it would be the 3,000 we would ask for escrow, correct? I mean, that because we think that it will probably take close to that.
Well, the answer is it would depend, and I would guess that number would go down over time depending on the nuances associated with the application, right? Again, the idea, the escrow number that we request of applicants is based off the complexity of the nature of their zoning relief being sought. If somebody like a owner of Stonebridge seeking text amendments, variations, and a PRD, or actually we'll just say a PRD and maybe text amendments, that would have, we would say that escrow may be $50,000, right? It depends on the nature and the scope of the relief versus a simple, like somebody seeking for, currently you need a special use permit to have a lift at the lakefront. I mean, that's something that's a special use. So, but the cost of producing that is very minimal. It's been done. There's only a handful of properties, and usually I think it's maybe I'm going to say $1,000 all in. So we usually, Glenn will just under the tent here, you're seeing it. Glenn will say, hey, here's the type of relief. What do you think we need for the escrow? And we kind of we scale it appropriately.
But I think it's important that the purpose of the escrow is that we're generally having the resident prepay for what we think it's going to cost, and it may be a little more than that, it may be a little less than that, but it limits village exposure. Although the resident is ultimately liable, it helps the village to have that out there as the pocket that gets reached into, and ultimately whatever it actually costs, the resident is refunded the difference, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, getting that cost up front when it generally costs more seems reasonable, and $3,000 is what it has been historically. We may want to change that, but at this point, it seems like reasonable to keep it that $3,000 where it is, since the resident will get that money back, and it's the fee for the application which will truly impact the net bottom line about what the resident is paying. And I guess I thought it was reasonable to put that at 500 as opposed to the higher 750. So that's my thought. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying, just from a logic standpoint on why the reason that we would decrease that fee by $250 versus other special use applications is because we want to encourage this. And if that's the rationale, then I can live with that. I think that, Susan, you may have a better perspective relative to why you guys made it a special use in the first place. But I guess to Kate Brienne's point, we would have to explain why one special use is less expensive than the other.
Right, and it was still being considered as a permitted use when I left the PCZBA. So I will tell you that that was a shift post writer, but I do think it makes sense to have it somewhat less. I do agree, though, that if we do that for this particular special use, why wouldn't we apply to the other special uses as well? I think that's a valid question. What I keep coming back to is it needs to align with one or the other. And so that's why I think 1,505 makes the most sense, because we're not creating sort of a third bucket. So special use generally is 3,750 for these electric lift systems or subterranean single family garages. This is a special use. And so it is more equivalent to the 25% of the applicable standard, or the applicable standard. It falls into that bucket because it's more akin to that, is sort of how I'm thinking of it. So I guess where I land is 15 and 5, because it is the burden is on the city, on the village, is more equivalent to the variation of less than 25%. And so I would line it up with that altogether, rather than create a third bucket of this 3,500 bucket. But all in all, it's not so much the money as I think the effort that the PCZBA was concerned about, the number of hearings one needed to go through, the cost of getting architects, or getting the process finished with the various number of a hearing. I think they were sensitive to that, the workshops and then the various hearings that were required. I know that was a sensitivity, more so than the $250. So I guess in the interest of proceeding, I would propose 1,500 and 500 as being comparable to the standard variation.
And Drew, you don't feel that that's exposing us in terms of the total being so much larger than 1,500, closer to 3,000, that, we're really exposing ourselves, or the resident has to pay that probably when they pay their building permit fee, so they can't really start doing anything till it all gets trued up anyway?
Yeah, I mean, the fee, the delta between what you're talking about, even 0 to 750, and the overall cost of the project, it's very nominal at the end of the day, right? This is largely a symbolic discussion. So I think,
Right. Well,
I think,
I'm talking about exposure to the village, and which would
Yeah.
be
well,
0 to
the village is covered because, the applicant's going to sign the ESCO agreement, and, we don't have exposure.
Well, but I mean, we do if we say 1,500's in escrow and it routinely is 3,000, and then we're floating this for a while, right?
I think it's ultimately that they go through the relief process. It does happen from time to time where they actually don't go to building permit, but if that's their intentions, they still need to get a permit from us, and they'll have to get trued up before that, so.
So it doesn't give you angst to go to hear Susan's recommendation?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, do we have a motion then to set that ADU special use only at 1,500 and 1,500 for the...
In honor of Trustee Ryder's logic, which made perfect sense to me, I will make that motion.
And I will second it.
All right. Can we have a roll call, please?
All right. Member Rappin.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
And Chair Ankerman.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
All right. So now we are officially done with the comprehensive fee revisions.
And the historic preservation piece was just a FYI at this point,
Yes, it's coming.
Drew?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's not, I mean, it happens from time to time where staff will bring to you a recommendation that can be, introduced at any time. There's always, opportunities, that make sense, whether a calendar year or beginning of a fiscal year or other dates make sense. So that's not terribly uncommon. So we'll bring that to you at a later date.
Yeah, and Drew, I will just note that I really like the direction that the Historic Preservation Committee is going, incentivizing folks as opposed to demanding, and I think they're getting there.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
People
Nice.
like incentives.
You'll get a chance to
Creative
talk about it in
solution.
person very soon.
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have a review of the vehicle equipment replacement. And the vehicle equipment replacement fund had some activity that didn't take place based on the pandemic and all of the things that were affecting our budget. Bettina, do you want to just kind of comment on the background regarding BERF?
Sure. So historically, just to recap the background, what the memo said, the equipment replacement fund, vehicle equipment replacement fund, is a sinking fund or a reserve account that each department and some other funds, including water, contribute to annually with a transfer based on, and those numbers are calculated based on the vehicles and the equipment that we have and their useful life, their replacement schedule, and the inflation rate that would cost to replace it based on that schedule. So in the last 2 years, because of COVID, those transfers were frozen. And this year is the first year in 2 years that we're looking to continue them at a full level, not partial. And the memo just outlines some of the capital expenditures that are in FY23 and 24. Some of them are pretty typical insofar as squad car replacements and technology recommendations from our network administrator and the typical personal computer replacement 4-year cycle. Some of the unusual, or I should say not typical items that are listed in here that are on the replacement cycle as needing to be replaced would be the public works backhoe, which is 20 years old, purchased in 2002. The bucket truck, 23 years old, purchased in 1999. And then some additions to the fire department equipment or replacements, thermal equipment, cameras, heart monitors, and some automated CPR devices, as well as replacing some EMS bags, and those are phased in over a 2-year period to get them all completely replaced. And that's really the quick version. There was also a chart included in the memo that would show, let me get there, I can share it again. It showed the fund balance versus the contribution and the revenues that we're transferring.
Thank you, Bettina.
Sure, you're welcome. So in the out years past the current fiscal year, the expenditures are based on the cycle in our replacement calculations. And the spikes, this one in particular out in 32, is inclusive of some fire department equipment that is scheduled or anticipated to be needing replacement at that point, and hence the spike in the fund balance and the revenues. Now, would this change? Would pricing change, or we look at used equipment, or if it were to get pushed out, obviously that would affect the whole picture. But it was just to give a sense of where the fund is going through FY40, which is, an estimate of what it would look like based on the contributions. And I also plotted those in the budget sheets to increase incrementally with an inflation factor so that we're not sitting at the continued $392,000 replacement. Those would increase all the way up to over $800,000 plus when you get into the out years.
So the net impact of us not contributing for the period of the pandemic has not significantly affected the health of the fund?
No, not really, because we also really paused spending. I mean, the only thing that we looked at in those years was squad car purchases, and we didn't do anything significant. So, and the fund was healthy to begin with. I mean, it's sitting on 1.3 million from the contributions prior that were increased the last 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And concerning the technology equipment, is that just computer equipment that's used? Or is it more encompassing other categories?
So it includes, for example, this year new servers were implemented. It includes different technology aspects with regards to security and infrastructure in our technology. So not just the physical hardware that employees are using as far as computers. It's more than that. It's more related to behind the scenes for security and to keep our systems up to date with licensors and various other items. For example, the fuel software that is used out at the Public Works facility, that was replaced as part of the replacement fund recently. So there are varying one-off items that are in there, and some of them are expensive.
Yeah.
So.
And considering, go ahead.
Well, I was just getting, the street equipment, I'm sorry if you just said that, I didn't catch it. The 285 in 2023, 2024.
The street equipment?
Yeah.
So that's a backhoe and a bucket truck.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you.
No, it's okay.
Just one quick question back to the technology category. I was wondering in terms of cybersecurity, where that kind of fit in and how we're addressing kind of just the changing climate and the reality that we need to be, aware of attacks and, safeguarding our systems.
So, without getting too technical into it, there were a couple of things that were implemented this year. One of them we just recently started paying for in regards to security. So there was a flat fee of about $4,000, and now there's a monthly fee per user, being per employee, per desktop user. That's different than what we used to have as far as security is concerned. And we're also close to implementing, I believe, through InterDev, the consortium, a product called Duo, which will provide a fob or some sort of key number that people will need to use in addition to their passwords when they log into systems. So it's just another level of security that's pretty typical in banking when you log in. So that's coming. And I believe, right, Drew, that will hopefully restrict the need for changing passwords.
Yes, I think every trustee has struggled with us maintaining our systems at one time or another, and the Duo is going to cure that.
Hear that.
Yeah.
So
I have a question.
there are certainly things that are part of that, those costs in there.
Bettina,
Any other?
yes, I do. I heard Bettina saying, well, we have a cost of replacement for servers, and I might have misheard you. But the basic point was you could also have a strategy to move to a more of a cloud-based strategy where your security would be a dual security from an end user standpoint and from a cloud standpoint. Have you guys considered that as well?
I can answer that. The answer is yes. We've talked about that. So we're a member of a consortium of communities that work together to jointly procure IT and IT risk management. And so we have looked at that, and that's not a requirement to be a member of the consortium, but a number of larger communities have. They've made that calculation that it makes sense for them to do that. Other smaller communities like Kenilworth and Lake Bluff, we have not gone to that because in the near term, the cost to maintain servers in-house is still less expensive than us to joining in a cloud for now. And the next, that's why we talked about that purchasing these servers when we did, because we did have that analysis take place. But
So I will speak as an IT guy. Buying your services on the cloud makes a lot more sense on the short term and the long term in terms of investment. I know that you have special government requirements, so I don't really know what is required here. But it would be a good thing to look at it, even without a consortium, looking at people like Microsoft that have very good incentive for small businesses, for example.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to continue to look at it. At some point, it's going to make sense for us to do so. So
Thank you.
Yep.
Bettina, is the Duo the two-step authentication? So you log in and then you have to answer a phone call?
I believe that it is going to be a fob-based system. So you'd have another number that you'd have to enter based on what's, one time appearing on your, either locally installed on an app on your device or that's handheld on a fob.
Okay. And is there any reason, I hear what Regis is saying. Are there any, Drew, you and I talked about this a while back, several months ago, with regard to ransomware and other things. Is there any reason that we might not be aware of why, other than just cost, why cloud-based data retention is not a good way to go for us? Is there anything else that, from a cybersecurity standpoint?
I'll tell you, working with our provider, Interdev, they, obviously, it helps them if all of their consortium are in the same system, right? Because they're managing one system. But they also acknowledge that we're in a different place in terms of scale. So they have not come at us with a hard press saying, you guys need to do this for security reasons, for any other, that they have not given us that recommendation. So they have allowed that flexibility amongst us and other communities. So again, at some point, I imagine they'll say for ease of administration or another recommendation, but it's still been a choice. So hopefully.
Right, which makes sense given how small we are relative to some other communities where it wouldn't make sense, and they would be much larger, and cloud-based applications would make more sense for them.
So I might want to answer that question from an IT standpoint.
Please.
We need to reduce the hard points of access in our network, okay? So we have servers, those were attack points from people from the outside. Having an infrastructure that is dual authentication or that are those numbers, those key fob numbers is perfect. You do two types of, you do multi-authentications by the time you want to log into your system, but having the possibility to reduce your hosted infrastructure here in this building is the way to reduce people trying to do attacks on you and ask for ransoms, simply enough, And so having a hosted infrastructure somewhere else, because you basically have your own architecture and your own security, and you benefit of the security from somebody else, so that would be Amazon or Microsoft or whoever else, is something you basically get for free at the end of the day. Just a thought, okay?
Noted.
Well, thank you for looking at that, Drew and Bettina. And, in terms of the annual contribution, is it correct to say then that we're going to resume that level of 392 kind of on a rolling basis? So we're heading back to where we were.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, were there any, we have a couple other items that we wanted to talk about, but I don't want to cut off this conversation. Were there any other vehicle equipment replacement fund questions or thoughts to share?
All my thoughts were answered.
That's great. All right, so do we want to just make a recommendation to move forward with the vehicle equipment replacement fund, plan and funding as outlined?
So moved.
I have one more questions before, that might be to Bettina and Drew. You're talking about purchasing police officer body and vehicle cameras. So just VR hardware. So what about the cost of operation? That is also significant. That will come from a different budget.
Actually,
I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
yeah, I got this one, Bettina. Actually, I'm gonna ask. Well, hold on. No. Okay, here we go. So Chief Hosking is actually he had to go to a funeral, couldn't make this meeting tonight. So right now, most departments are selecting a certain provider of hardware that's also, it's turnkey. They also support with the storage of the video. And so that is the most departments in our area are pursuing that one manufacturer and service provider in that regard. And in fact, I'm trying to think of who just, I think Lake Forest and Highland Park and some other neighboring communities have already gone to the same platform. It's the same actual company that makes our tasers.
And Glenview.
Yeah, and Glenview's also done it. So a lot of our partners are all going with the same product.
Good.
So a lot of standardization. The cameras that the officers would wear is the same hardware that we want to outfit our vehicles with, so it all speaks to each other, and that it would be, in my understanding, the technology is when they pull into the station, it automatically downloads and gets saved, and so it's constantly being updated and supported that way.
Can we achieve an economy of scale by?
No, because we talked about that too. Yeah, it's one of those where we were hoping that if we all bought in bulk and did a joint contract, but they're not doing any deals.
Okay.
No.
So, thank you.
Yes, because we looked at doing a joint procurement, and it's like, it doesn't matter. So,
Thank you, Regis.
Thank you.
So we were about to entertain a motion to,
I heard the motion from Mr. Member Rappin.
yes. So do we have a second? Okay. Roll call, please.
Second.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
Member Rappin,
Aye.
and Chair Inkerman.
Aye. The last two items on the discussion for this evening is a review of the pay plan and an informational report regarding the CIP rating system. And I almost wondered, Drew, would it be helpful to just briefly talk about the CIP rating system? Because I think, we're not going to get too deep into it, but then we can at least get that off the list and then take.
Well, if it's okay, most people that I spoke to earlier today didn't have any questions about the proposed pay plan. So if there aren't any, we can jump into the capital.
Perfect. So there were, let's just take a look here at the.
Yeah, we're trying to do everything we always try to do is try to, maintain a competitive pay and so that we can attract and retain our employees and avoid pay compression and try to ensure internal equity. And so all these things, all these recommended changes to our mins and maxes reflect that.
Right. So, any further comments or, okay.
I had a question, since this is my first go-around with this. How do you define market?
So the village's pay plan outlines specific communities that are identified as our market, and we try to stick with those. Sometimes there are certain positions that make it difficult to really have an apples and apples comparison. So we do our best to do that because every organization is different and everybody provides services in a different way, but that's the approach we take.
Okay, so they'd be like similar size, Drew, or, and within a, like the North Shore versus downstate Illinois? How do you, I know it's hard to draw a map.
Page
Listed somewhere.
27 of the PDF, page 4 of the pay plan identifies the communities. So Deerfield, Glencoe, Gurnee, Highland Park, Lake Forest, Libertyville, North Chicago, Northfield, Vernon Hills, and Waukegan. I think the village has looked at, these communities knowing that there are differences, but this is maybe as good as we're going to get. And depending on the position, like from time to time, when we've gone out looking for a new chief of police, we've done national searches. So sometimes this, the market gets bigger, so.
Understood. Yeah, that's a good example where the market is much different for that position because of that than it would be for something else.
Yep.
Okay.
And Drew, can I just clarify? I mean, it makes sense. It's a competitive environment today. These ranges, which increase, in some cases a little bit more substantially, our current staff, it's not as though we're going to go up 10% in staff costs, because we looked at your numbers last year and it was like or last week, it's like a 3 or 4% increase. So it's really increasing this range more for as we hire new folks. As opposed,
I would go as far as say no current staff member gets moved because of the minimum gets increased. So there's nobody at the bottom of the range that gets shifted up,
right?
Plus a merit. So correct.
That's what I figured, and so we will be within our budget next year, and this doesn't impact that.
Correct.
It makes sense to me. Yep.
Okay, any other comments? All right, so does someone want to make a motion to move forward with the FY 2023 proposed pay plan as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Ryder?
Aye.
Member Rappin?
Aye.
Chair Inkerman?
Aye.
Thank you.
And finally, the informational report regarding the CIP rating system.
Okay.
I was very excited about this.
So after the last finance committee.
I was. I'm not kidding.
President Charlot and I had a conversation, and he asked me, why don't we have a rating system for these? And I said, he goes, why don't you have a staff recommendation regarding the capital plan? And I said, well, we do. This is what it is. And I think he was asking in so many words about, why isn't there, a more numerical prioritization based off an analysis that, that is something that is, revisited every year, priorities change, but it's prioritized based off a set analytical approach. And so what we did is we went back and created found a good sample of a plan that was being utilized in another community. We modified it to fit our needs, and we individually, Jeff Hansen, the village engineer, finance director Bettina Cano, and myself went back and rated the projects, and we actually went back in time and looked at projects too that we had already, the board had already approved and that were programmed and actually completed. And, but they had been in a multi-year capital plan, and we looked at those as well as projects in the out years. And I think the good news was, using this system, all the projects really fell as we recommended them. And so that we tested it, and then we went back and said, okay, how can we maybe nuance this further? And then we had the chief of police weigh in on his opinion regarding public safety. Bettina, can you bring this up, please?
Sure.
And then we also talked to the public works superintendent about his opinion regarding maintenance. But the categories here, can you go to the first tab that has the approach?
This one?
Yes, could you walk them through that, please?
Sure. So we utilized some, I'm sorry?
Before you guys start, the thing I wanted to say was, we very much trust Drew and the team to actually come up with, okay, what is important to them.
Yeah.
And fourth, we shouldn't come as, okay, we think this is what should be first, but we think that, okay, you guys have done a really important job of classifying, and from a political standpoint, we might want to move these things, but from my standpoint, the work Drew is doing is that, no, it makes most sense from an administrative standpoint, and that is where that conversation came from.
Yes.
So that we trust the staff to actually doing a really good job. So do you guys have a good scoring system? And that's where that came from.
And the answer is yes. Here it is.
Do you want me to go through these quickly?
Please.
Okay, so we looked at some competencies related to capital improvement, and gave them, and they had scores from 1 through 5 based on certain related questions within those competencies. So master plan, does the project include part of the master plan? Is it prioritized by citizen engagement? That was one of them. Health and safety, an important factor, rated projects 1 through 5 for impact on health and the well-being. Infrastructure, is it an infrastructure project? Is it related to a life cycle analysis or repair replacement? Rated that 1 through 5. Regulatory compliance, does it address certain regulatory mandates? And rated 1 through 5 as well. Is there external funding? And those numbers were related to external funding insofar as grants. What type of funding was there? Impact on operational budget. That being, will it require additional personnel to operate? Is there additional annual maintenance? How does it affect project budget? Are there efficiencies? So rated that 1 through 5. Quality of life, as far as the community itself is concerned, does the project address quality of life issues 1 through 5? And then timing and location, as far as where the project is timing a factor in how it's completed first versus other projects or other things around it. So very quickly, then each person rated the projects that you are familiar with from the 15-year summary. Those numbers a little bit updated because there was some redundancy and a few little typos in here. So 1 through 38, those projects were then summarized by each of us, as Drew said, and then banded. And there was some looking at the formulas, however, I did change a little bit and decided to go with just the weighted score flat out and not try to bring it up to 1 to 100. So it's a weighted score based on 1 through 5. And this is how.
Bettina, could you clarify, please, how like the idea that coming into regulatory compliance is weighted heavier than quality of life versus, yeah, please.
So I'll just show mine. So each of the competencies had a rating score that we looked at in other communities and liked what they were doing. So that drove a percentage of weight based on the score. So regulatory, as you mentioned, was rated 4, so 25% of weighted versus some of the other ones. Master plan 2, health and safety 3, infrastructure was 2, external funding 2, and then impact and quality of life and timing all at 1. So this was just a sampling of what each staff that reviewed it received and went through and created a score based on what those competencies were.
So,
And then
but
a
just
weighted
to
score.
point out though, that a 1 is actually a lower rating as opposed to a
Yes.
4. So it's
Yes.
4 times as important, if you will.
Right.
This is beautiful. This is the way it should be. So thank you very much, the two of you, or the 5 or 6 of you doing that work, because that's really what I was wondering about at first. So thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure, no problem. So then the ranking summaries were, this is just the spreadsheet were added up and weighted together and then banded on this with a pivot table, Barbara. That's why there are no formulas here. But so it takes you through the project number that was from the original sheet in the budget and the weighted score, and just colored based on 2 through 5.
So
You can
the
see where-
ones at the
what-
bottom of the list are the most heavily weighted and the
Mhm.
most important.
And some of some staffs, we really wanted to look at Jake's opinion with regard to maintenance and Chief's opinion with regard to health and safety. So those formulas were factored in on the scores that I didn't weigh their numbers in on. So
Awesome.
that's the very quick version of.
And did you say that it just so happened that these ended up to be in the order of importance that we thought they were? Or this aligned well to where we thought these were? And
We think that it aligned pretty well as far as what was discussed at other meetings and how we thought things should be done.
Well, I think you were, correct me if I'm wrong, don't you mean that we went through what already happened and said, how would these line up with scoring? And so that was what she was saying.
Yeah.
Right, there are some in here that were completed already, yes.
Bettina, can you
I
go to,
see.
can you go to my
That one.
tab, Bettina?
It's very colorful, Drew.
Thank you.
Your tab is very important, Drew.
Well, no, the brown projects were ones that were already completed. But they did, I labeled those, but the ones in yellow, my recommendation would be to, these are regular, these things are always going to score really high. Pavement maintenance, right? Lift station, these are the things that are like annual investments in infrastructure that probably don't even belong in the capital plan. These are just like single line items. We're making these investments. They're not particular projects. And like, to me, they're always going to end up ranking high. And another community that we're looking at, they had these projects and it was unclear as to whether they were being treated as always active, like these bundle of projects were never, the rating was always so high that it's like it threw everything off. But I think that's what we would be dealing with. And I think so the ones that are in yellow here, like the village's reoccurring stormwater utility fee study. Okay, well, that's something we invested in at one point, and then now it's a recurring investment to keep it current.
So maybe you could segregate your problems to be acute and chronic. Sorry, I'm healthcare here.
Yes.
But acute and chronic, as you know, you will always replace pavement, okay? And so that might actually be a different category.
Well, it is, and certainly the way staff looks at it at the same time, and we always go back to that, there's a minimum investment we should be making in each system, right? And so if that's a given, well, then we can start pulling some of these things out.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, there's projects that were in another community that were very lowly rated, but that were getting funded and getting programmed immediately for other reasons, right? And sometimes these, as much as you put into the background and the work of these things, there could be other reasons decisions are made.
Yeah.
This all goes back to, I think, a conversation that I had with Chair Ankerman years ago when we said, how do we explain to certain individuals in the community why this project gets moved out when it's going to happen, or it was originally planned to happen sooner, and then we push it out? But how do you justify that or explain that to somebody? So this is a way to do that.
This is
Yeah,
really
I was just very impressed with the breadth of input from various staff members, just the thoughtfulness in weighting certain things more heavily than others. And, it speaks to what is kind of what was being done without all the formulas and science, but it was to some degree being done, but it's a more objective metric that is explainable and trackable. And I just think it was awesome.
So if I could just add one thing for me, the next step in this is to create a final tab to this that will actually list out, as Drew had mentioned, pull out the maintenance items,
Yeah.
list the projects, and show the revenues and the expenses and where the net differences are coming from. And so far as fund balance or what you have decided, those monies should be coming from. So some sort of kind of reconciliation of the cash behind this.
You mean like to check it relative to what the capital fund has in it and the general fund?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which I think
More of a-
is a narrowing of discretionary dollars, right?
Right.
So,
With more of a,
Yeah.
a tangible, you can look at it and say, oh, well, we're going to have to take this much from here and there. And that's been a question I think that I've heard. So it's coming.
That's awesome. I'm thrilled with it.
Yeah.
Any other
Well done.
comments? I think we've got Joya included as well now. Joy, do you have any observations or comments? Not to put you on the spot, but I know you joined us and wanted to give
Sorry,
you
I
the
was a little
opportunity.
late. Yeah, no, this is really good information. And it's laid out so nicely, and it really is really well done. So thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
That was pretty horrible, but I just want to get input from everybody.
That's good.
And on Valentine's Day.
Oh, yes. You all are my Valentine tonight for showing up. All right. Any other questions or comments regarding CIP? Otherwise, we can make a motion to, well, this is just information that you're sharing.
yes,
So we could, if there's nothing else, we could make a motion to adjourn. Would somebody like to do that?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Member Rappin,
Aye.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
and Chair Anchorman.
Aye. We're
So
adjourned. Thank you.
So everybody will stay
All right.
here. This is the same call, and